During the Second World War, Yugoslavia was a battle theater where a large variety of mostly obsolete, rare, or improvised armored vehicles was used. Occasionally, however, some better designs found their way to this chaotic battlefield. This was the case with the Soviet T-34 tanks. In Yugoslavia, these were initially used by the Germans in limited numbers, and they would see extensive actions with the Soviets during the liberation of Serbia. The Partisans also had a chance to operate the T-34, either captured from the Germans or supplied directly by the Soviets. But before we continue, did you know that we published a book entitled Rejection and Neglect: Story of Our Lives? It covers the first years of armored fighting vehicle use, misuse, and abuse in the Netherlands. With 8 of our trademark illustrations and around 80 of photographs and drawings, the book tells the story of Dutch hubris, overconfidence, rejection, and neglect of armor, as well as the gradual realization of how wrong they were. If you're interested, you can buy it as an ebook or audiobook on our PayHip store, link in the description. Following the quick conquest of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, its territories were divided between the victorious Axis forces. Due to the harsh and brutal occupation, by the second half of 1941, 2 resistance groups started a rebellion against the occupiers. These insurgencies proved difficult to defeat, forcing the Germans and their allies to send more and more troops and materials into the theater. In the case of the Germans, they employed whatever they had on hand and didn't badly need elsewhere, which mostly included older or captured equipment. In rare cases, more modern equipment was also available in limited numbers. For example, during the summer of 1944, the SS Polizei Regiment 10 was transferred from Ukraine to Trieste in northeastern Italy. Once there, the unit was tasked with defending vital transport lines against the Yugoslav partisans. This unit had around 10 T-34-76 tanks of various types in its inventory, and these were employed by the Germans in the vain hope of stopping the advancing partisan Fourth Army from reaching Trieste in the spring of 1945. The partisan forces were supported by the 1st Tank Brigade, which was equipped with British-supplied M3A1 and M3A3 tanks, AEC Mark II armored cars, and at least one 7.5 centimeter PaK-40 armed M3 tank. During the fighting at the end of April, one German T-34-76 tank was destroyed by the modified M3 tank. The German police regiment was eventually shattered, and its T-34-76 tanks were either destroyed or captured. Those that were fully operational were immediately put back into service by the Yugoslavs. After the war, these were used along with a later improved version for some time, before being removed from service. The T-34 tanks would also see service in Yugoslavia with the Soviets. In the autumn of 1944, the Soviet Third Ukraine Front proceeded toward Yugoslavia in order to support the partisans in eliminating the German forces occupying Serbia. This formation was supported by large armored elements, which consisted of 358 T-34-76 and T-34-85 tanks, and self-propelled guns. After successfully defeating the Germans in Serbia, the Soviets moved north towards Hungary. The largest and best-equipped partisan armored unit was the 1st Tank Brigade, and it was organized and equipped according to Western standards. While the partisans provided the Allies with sufficient crews to form an even larger formation, this was never realized. The Allies, for various reasons, did not want to provide additional armored vehicles to the partisans. On the other hand, the Soviets were quite willing to help, but were prevented from doing so by the distance between the two forces at that point. In order to not waste time, the remaining partisans that were stationed in Italy were transported by air to the Soviet Union from Italy. Once all were assembled, they were transported to Moscow before finally reaching their final destination near Tula. Additional personnel was recruited in various ways, including people of Yugoslavian origin that were being held in Soviet camps. A partisan delegation was even sent to the Grozny prison camp, where additional manpower was recruited from the German legionary units. Interestingly, the partisan officials that visited this prison were strictly forbidden from recruiting any former Croatian Ustaše soldiers. Yugoslavian soldiers that were in service prior to the war and had been schooled in the Soviet Union also joined this unit. It was the first step in the creation of the unit later known as the 2nd Tank Brigade. The order for the creation of such a unit to support the Yugoslav partisans was issued by Stalin himself. This unit was to be solely organized based on Soviet equipment and training. The organizational structure of this unit was also based on the Soviet model. It would have 3 tank battalions with 2 tank companies each company in turn with 3 platoons. The platoon's strength was 3 tanks with 1 additional for the platoon commander. In total, this unit was supplied with 65 T-34-85 tanks and 3 BA-64 armored cars, including support vehicles. This formation would also be supported by a mechanized infantry battalion, providing the tanks with close infantry support. Ideally, the battalion was to be equipped with trucks for transport, but the partisans lacked these, and the soldiers had to use the tanks themselves for transport. Additional auxiliary units, such as reconnaissance, a medical platoon, and 1 anti-aircraft company were also available. The unit was officially formed on the 6th of October, 1944. In order to train the partisan crews, the Soviets had to provide 16 T-34 tanks. After the completion of crew training, the brigade was finally fully formed on the 8th of March, 1945, and was slowly relocated to Yugoslavia. It was transported by rail from the Soviet Union through Romania and Bulgaria, finally reaching Serbia on the 26th of March, 1945. The following day, it participated in a military parade in the capital of Belgrade, and on the 28th of March, most of the battalion's strength was transferred to the Serbian front. A tank company was stationed in Belgrade to provide protection for the city and the partisan high command. The Serbian front was a vital German defensive line in the area of Srem and Slavonia. The Germans fortified their positions using extensive trench lines, vast minefields, and entrenched firing points. This line was vital for them as it protected the units retreating from Greece and Yugoslavia. The partisans were poorly adapted to this kind of combat and had significant issues penetrating enemy defense positions. On the 12th of April 1945, the 2nd Tank Brigade was split to provide firing support for the advancing partisans. The 1st Battalion was attached to the 1st Proletarian Infantry Division and the 3rd Battalion to the 21st Serbian Infantry Division. Opposing them were elements of the German 34th Corps supported by Croatian Axis forces. The attack began on the same day, with the partisans advancing toward Vukovar, supported by artillery. The baptism of fire of the 2nd Tank Brigade was chaotic. Due to heavy German and Croatian resistance and very poor leadership, great losses could not be avoided. The unit lost 8 vehicles, with 2 badly damaged, 5 lightly damaged, and 1 BA-64 armored car completely written off. The mechanized infantry battalion lost a third of its personnel. The commander of this unit had forbidden the infantry from disembarking from the tanks that carried them until the enemy line was reached. Most were killed before this actually happened, and the tanks were left with no infantry support. Despite these heavy losses, the unit managed to reach the city of Vukovar that day. The following day, under heavy German anti-tank fire, 2 more tanks were lost. These were taken out by a 7.5 centimeter PaK-40 gun. One of them received a hit between the turret and the upper hull, and although the turret was severely damaged, the tank was not completely destroyed. At this point, the partisans were forced to abandon damaged tanks regardless of the extent of the damage. The brigade's engineers simply lacked the experience and even the equipment to tow these to safety. In the meantime, the thus far absent 2nd Tank Battalion advanced toward the front line. On the 13th of April, it came into contact with the retreating enemy but failed to annihilate them. When they finally caught up with the Germans, the Partisan Tank Battalion, supported by a single infantry battalion, proceeded with the attack, expecting weak enemy resistance. This would not be the case, and resistance was heavier than expected. While providing fire support for the infantry, 2 T-34-85 tanks became bogged down in a canal that the partisans failed to spot in time. One of them had its barrel dig into the ground. The following day, another attack was launched. This time, the partisans attacked the enemy position from a distance with tank fire. After several rounds were fired, the tanks rushed forward with the expectation that their fire had weakened the defenders. When the two lead tanks reached the enemy position, they were instead met with Panzerfaust fire. Both were taken out, with the last tank managing to pull back. Under heavy partisan pressure, by the end of the day, the enemy was finally beaten back. On the 18th of April, the 2nd Tank Brigade was meant to begin attacking Axis positions near the village of Pleternica. Once again, inadequate leadership and poor assessment of the enemy's defensive line led to a failed attack, and the whole unit had to retreat after an Axis counterattack. The Axis counterattack was spearheaded by 1 Hotchkiss and 3 Fiat, possibly L640, tanks. The following day, another attack was launched by the Partisans. This time, they systematically began demolishing houses in order to take away any possible cover from the enemy. The enemy armor was not used against the partisan tanks, as they really could do little against them. The fighting for this village lasted up to the 20th of April. While the Partisans finally managed to take it, the brigade lost 2 more tanks, with 1 destroyed and the other damaged. From the 23rd of April to the 4th of May, the 2nd Tank Brigade was inactive due to a general lack of spare parts, fuel, and ammunition. The greatest problem was the lack of summer lubricants, as the brigade commander simply failed to request these from the Soviets on time. For this reason, the T-34-85 engines often overheated. During this time, the unit's commanders came under criticism from the partisan high command. Due to their poor leadership, the brigade suffered unnecessary losses. In addition, the unit was rarely used as a whole. Instead, smaller groups of tanks were used to support the infantry, which greatly affected their performance. The number of tanks lost by this point is not precisely known. According to the Partisans' own documentation, dated the 25th of April 1945, they had 50 fully operational tanks. Croatian documents from the war listed 34 destroyed partisan tanks during April of 1945. Both of these factions had reasons to present figures that may not have been completely true. For the Croatians, by this point, any kind of success could be used for propaganda purposes. The Partisans, on the other hand, may have downplayed their losses to hide the brigade's rather poor leadership, in a classic example of Branjo. The drive to the west continued on the 4th of May. By this point, the enemy resistance was collapsing, and the enemy was now desperate, trying to reach the Allies in Italy to avoid surrendering to the Partisans. On the 8th of May, as the brigade was approaching Zagreb, they came under fire and 1 tank was lost, but the city was fully liberated on the following day. On the 10th, elements from this brigade, supported by the mechanized infantry, attacked enemy positions at Sestina. Once again, the infantry was forbidden from disembarking from the tanks, leading to heavy losses. The tanks entered Ljubljana shortly after, and they would be sent to Trieste, where they awaited the end of the war. After the war, the surviving T-34-85 tanks would be used as the main fighting force of the newly created Yugoslav People's Army for years to come. Despite their obsolescence, they would remain in service up to the early 2000s and even take part in the Yugoslav wars. This concludes our look at the usage of the T-34 tank in Yugoslavia. Would you like to learn more about this overlooked front of the Second World War? Let us know in the comments. If you haven't already, consider becoming a subscriber so you don't miss a single video. If you want to contribute more directly, consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. The money comes back to you in the form of bigger and better videos. Until next time, keep us in your sights.